Officially live on LinkedIn. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. For those of you who are just joining, we're giving everyone a couple minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. All right, we gave everyone a couple minutes to join. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're officially live on LinkedIn. We're really excited to be going live with you today. We're going to be talking about a really important topic, which is DevSecOps and the integration of security within your software development cycle. So we have some of our experts here today from Taos and IBM. They're going to share some of their insight with you on why this is important, but also how you can think about ways to adopt it at your organization as well. So we hope this information is really insightful. We're going to start off by walking through a quick presentation of DevSecOps. From there, we're going to dive into a Q&A session with our team. So with that being said, we're going to be pulling questions from the chat channel. As we go through the presentation, anything that you have questions about, that you'd like more insight on, please feel free to throw those questions in the chat, and we'll be grabbing them and answering them at the end of the presentation. But before we dive into that, I want to do a quick introduction of all of the panelists that we have on today, including myself. So I'm Hannah Yoder. I am a customer success manager at Taos. I work as an advocate for our clients. We work really closely together to make sure that they're achieving success. And I also help with developing analytics to track that success. That being said, I'm not the DevSecOps expert on the call today. I'm going to be moderating and hosting today, but want to go ahead and introduce the rest of the team. Brandon, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Thanks, Hannah. Hey, everyone. My name is Brandon Jean-Marie. I am the DevSecOps leader and senior managing consultant for the Cloud Security Services team here at IBM, and I look forward to speaking with everybody today. Go ahead, Tim.
Thanks, Brandon. My name is Tim Clark. I'm a principal architect at Taos, and I'm happy to share a lot of my DevSecOps experience with all here on the phone.
Hi, my name is Larry Labasse. I'm one of Taos' security practice leaders and security architect. I basically work with Tim and others on ensuring that what we put in place is secure and works well for the companies.
All right, thanks everyone. Let's go ahead and jump in to the presentation.
So I'll be taking the first two slides. So this always I look at everybody. We start off with the scare slide. You know, what is the growth factor of threats? How much is it going to cost us? What's the risk? And if we really take a look at this, it's more about the trajectory. And then I'll speak a couple of points on how to address where the average costs come from and other items. So really, we continue to see the cost to companies of cybercrime globally is it's growing exponentially. We're over 1 trillion just in 2020. This year alone, in 2022, that's expected to go to 1.5 trillion at least. And that can be as a combination of factors, not only of recent threats, recent global events. But in addition, a lot of things have changed over the past few years, and the threat actors are becoming smarter and smarter, and they're trying different vectors to get into your company, to get into your applications, to really get in and stay in. So where we want to focus on is really securing the pipeline and really securing your company overall. If we step back and take a look at the DevSecOps market size, it is just growing exponentially, because not only do you get the security benefits, but you also get other benefits, which we'll speak on later on, like time to market, greater application velocity, all sorts of different factors that Tim and Brandon will speak on. I really want to focus on this slide, though, on the $28K average cost to address security issues discovered in applications in production. And that seems like a small number, but it's not. It really depends on the size of your company. But remember, that's an average, because there's a lot of small companies out there, and there's only, for example, 100 Fortune 500 companies. The range of costs for a security issue can vary where it's found. So, for example, as we push left into the pipeline or into the development cycle, your costs go down exponentially. To give you an example of that, if a developer has access to the right tool sets and can run them themselves, your average cost for a fix, because it's found early, can be as low as 1 hour of that developer's time. Whereas when it's in production and all of a sudden we have something like a log4j happen and it's an all hands on deck issue, you can easily hit the hundreds of thousands or more, depending upon how many people have to be involved, how you handle that, and how efficiently you can actually get the fixes out, or even just the workarounds. So that's really one of the areas why we want to focus on, really it's about focusing on introducing security early and taking it through the pipeline, because this is only going to continue and it's only going to get worse. That 40% application vulnerabilities that are found to be higher critical risk, that's going to continue. That is down slightly from previous years, but the trajectory of that is very, very slow compared to the costs of a breach. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So really some of the core principles that will help your business, and I kind of say business because really IT has been running the DevOps pipeline for all, but I'm seeing more and more companies move it outside of IT or merge IT into operations groups, and some just have pure operations groups. Really, it is a strategy, as it sees here. It's an approach. It's a combination of things. It's just not one. You need to have a good culture in your company and across between your departments, between the applications engineers and your operations engineers and your security team. Your security team really wants to help the others by morphing into a trusted advisor for them, and then allowing the others to move fast, communicate well, and just really collaborate as a company. Process is critical in this, though. If you do not, you can put the processes in place, but if you do not meld them to the company, it's like any other project, they're going to fail. So what you have to do is you have to look at your processes. You have to discuss them with your appropriate mindset. You also have to discuss them with your appropriate stakeholders, and really just make sure that it fits your company, because there's no one size shoe that's going to fit all. Every company is different. And then the technology as well. Some companies really like open source technology, so they'll go down that path. Some people like the fact that you can buy support with certain technologies. So that really, you've got to sit down as a company and look at the overall picture and make sure that it fits your culture. Automation is another area that is really critical and key. And the more you can automate, the better off you will be. Whether it is time to deployment, making it simpler, easier, or it is meeting compliance needs. For example, if you're HIPAA and high trust, taking a control from a manual control and turning it into an automated control or a system control will actually make your audits go quicker, easier, and be cheaper. And that's, as everybody knows, is one of the things. Audits cost a lot of money. So by automating that and turning it into a system control where you can, instead of having to do a sample size of 10, now maybe you're doing a sample size of 1. So that speeds the whole process as well. And then with the automation gives you greater capabilities for measuring what's happening. We typically look at monitoring. Everybody thinks of something like, putting up a Zabbix server and monitoring operations, or maybe performing synthetic transactions. and making sure the system's working, but there are other monitoring things that you need to do. There are other measurements that have to happen. And so by having using DevSecOps, introducing it into your pipeline, you are able to measure the whole end-to-end process of from a developer to production. And not only can you monitor the security of it, but you can also monitor the whole flow for cost, efficiency, and then you can review that with the different departments, with the different teams, and just look for more efficiencies. But one of the key things in it is sharing. You really have to have a collaborative culture and be open to sharing really the successes especially, but also the failures. When something goes wrong or something breaks, be willing to share that, share the data so that way everybody can have input. It might not be just a technological failure. It could be a process failure. So that's where being open across the business and especially between business departments is key. I know between engineering and IT and security, there usually is this natural apprehension just to share. But if you can get through that, it will actually make this process much easier. It will also just really enhance your DevSecOps pipeline because it's really building security into the DNA of the company, which then makes everybody's jobs easier, everybody's lives easier, and just brings efficiency. So next slide.
Thanks, Larry. And just a reminder for anyone who is just joining us right now, feel free to throw your questions in the chat and we'll answer them at the end.
So in this next slide, we want to illustrate some of the componentry or some of the comments that Larry had made earlier related to the culture, the strategy, and some of the automation. So in essence, we're moving the entire operations and development of the SDLC to the left. So when you're talking about integrating or developing or building out a feature or application or service, you are, what is the threat model of that application? So prior to architecting the application to meet the business objectives, is identifying where the threats are related to that application or build. That could be endpoint security, that could be entitlement, user access. How does that application access a particular data store? Is there a particular secret or any type of key management system that needs to be considered? But understanding and identifying your threat and developing basically a security backlog around the development of that product. So in essence, as Larry had mentioned earlier, is developing your security profile with your feature component to develop a secure application. When talking to clients a number of occasions, people ask us, "Hey Tim, how do I make my application more secure?" Again, when we talk about any type of sharing or collaborative effect, when you're utilizing any type of SCM, GitHub, a repository, how you check in your code, what is the custodian of that code, how is that application secure, how is it tested, how is it integrated with your SCM, how is it verified, all that should be part of your considerations of how you secure your application as well as your overall infrastructure stack. I think one of the key components and one of the things that people underestimate is the actual automated testing. So this is not functional or feature testing. This could go all the way back up to the local testing or the linting of the application, any type of code verification, looking for vulnerabilities in that application prior to commit, any type of rigor that you can include prior to committing your code is absolutely essential to any type of secure platform. Continuous assurance, are we validating our code prior to deployment? Do I have a peer review that attested to that actual security vulnerability being fixed, updated? Are we aware of security vulnerability? Are we doing any testing before I go to the next stage? Any type of advanced or integration testing, building OLAs or any type of gentleman's agreement, if you want to call that, of how you stub out endpoints, especially with applications, or better yet, any type of enterprise that has a portfolio of applications, you will generally have some type of validation between service A and service B. When I run on my test automation, I will have a valid version of that, my dependency application built into that, and I will move forward or basically validate that. When we talk again about, or furthermore, regarding secure operations, release, deploy, and decommission. This is all valid in the cloud as well as outside the cloud, right? Any type of continuous component control, how that application is deployed, how is it verified, all of your infrastructure code should be validated prior to deployment, and it also should be integrated with each individual build. In most cases, we try to advise clients related to immutable strategies, so the full stack is basically verified and tested prior to deployment. You always want to advise clients on, what is your expected outcome. You should know your vulnerabilities and your risk profile prior to deployment. When we get closer towards the right of the SDLC, operate, monitor, talking about the reviewing feedbacks, understanding any type of visualization related to the vulnerabilities, deployment, the speed, any type of forensics that you can gather pre and post deployment are valid and should be part of your backlog, which was speaking about earlier. At the end of the day, it's rinse repeat, right? Developing a secure pipeline should be integrated day one at code commit check-in. And furthermore, when that mature or call it finalized application artifact is deployed to production or market, essentially any type of residual artifacts or feedback that you can build in your backlog just ensures a more secure program. Next slide, please. Here, a number of clients ask me, Tim, hey, what's the tool to make me secure? What we want to try to illustrate here is that there is not one tool. As Larry had mentioned earlier, it's a lot of it is about strategy, collaboration, understanding your application architecture, understanding your vulnerabilities. How do you develop software as an organization? Now, that's not what I mean by organization, that's across the entire enterprise. Having any type of single tool set or the best tool for your particular needs, business, market, etc., is interesting, but focusing on what makes you secure or what your vulnerabilities are that aligns with any type of inherent regulatory compliance aspects, depending on where you are in the world and what type of application or service you're delivering to your customer base regarding that market. The tool set kind of plays into that. Understanding your strategy, understanding what your vulnerabilities are, and also understanding what type of automation, which is key to this, of what you're trying to integrate. When we talk in this slide, we talk about develop securely and secure operations. There's two facets to this, but at the end of the day, it's a single pipeline, right? So in your code and build, for example, on the left side of the screen, we're demonstrating here the integration and orchestration aspects of your application. How do you automate the testing of automation? How do you test deployment? How do you test the compile time? That is integrated within the application build cycle. And you also are testing vulnerabilities within that component. Again, when we get into the next column, we talk a little bit about test. You see a lot of the Jenkins icons, if people are familiar with that. Jenkins is a great tool set, but so is Argo CD, CI Circle, etc. All of these components can be utilized in the same fashion. It's just understanding what your strategy is. When we talk about release, deploy, and decommission, there's two facets in the physical presence. If you're running any type of physical underlying infrastructure with Kubernetes, OpenShift, etc., having the ability to decom worker nodes or decommission any type of artifacts or infrastructure that is not in use is kind of key. Again, the cloud platform kind of plays in this a little more fundamentally easier, as you can develop immutable strategies and bring these things down as you are bringing up another version, blue-green scenario, parallel deployments, all of that kind of plays in that strategy. Finally, when we talk about operate and monitor, that is kind of key here. Again, talking about the feedback loop, understanding how you deploy things, look at verifying your logs prior to deployment, post-deployment, understanding your vulnerabilities, know what your risk profile is going into that. We can talk further if anybody has any questions about that. Obviously, we can take questions about any of these tool sets. I want to hand it off to my esteemed colleague, Brandon. Take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate it. And like Tim said, guys, I'm going to be as brief as possible. We really want to get to your guys' questions, so please put that in the chat with anything you see here, any use case. I'm going to talk briefly, like I said, about what we see today in the DevSecOps market and how we typically help clients and, what we see out there. And like Larry said earlier, one size doesn't fit all. So there's very many different approaches to this. So just keep that in mind as we talk through this. So in front of you, you'll see kind of a zoomed in area of the code and build cycle, right? Along with design as well. What you see in red is ways that typically we see the most value to kind of bring security into your DevOps pipeline, right? There's a lot outside of this that needs to be taken care of as well. You know, you have to have the right culture, you have to have the right people. There needs to be, you know, a kind of culture about learning and bringing security awareness to everyone, not just security personnel, right? If you kind of hone into the middle here, you'll see continuous integration. And really, this is kind of key. We talked about sharing, measurement, and automation. We want to be able to get the information to the security personnel as quick as possible. You know, can we integrate a scanning tool, and can we get that information back to the developers, right? Can we change developer habit? Because that's going to pay dividends more down the line, right? And are we even thinking through logic architecture flaws? So that's why we're really heavily on the threat modeling approach, because it really gives you a good idea of what could be logically wrong or what could be of grave concern to a typical application architecture, or maybe your cloud setup or something like that, right? So do we have secure architecture and design patterns that we've developed over threat modeling these same use cases over and over again, right? What regulations do we have to worry about? So on and so forth, right? And then we have this good feedback loop. We have all these great vulnerabilities. Are we doing anything to remediate those? Is there action coming from what we found, right? So do we have a good security remediation plan, and are we providing enough resources and enough aid to the teams that are going through and trying to do that, right? We obviously want to reduce the risk to the enterprise as much as possible. And is there tooling? We don't want to heavily rely on tooling, right? We want to make sure process and people are in the right place. But can tooling automate and help us, right? That's where we kind of lead to the runtime protection. Can we protect our web apps with a RASP or a WAF? You know, is there CSPM in order to secure our cloud infrastructure? Containers are highly prevalent today in a DevSecOps culture. How are we securing those, right? Hannah, if you go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm kind of going to, this is our portfolio of best practices. This is kind of how we start from an advise all the way to how we manage DevSecOps, right? And again, like Larry said, one size does not fit all. So typically what we do in the market is we try to find the client pain points, right? We'll have a lot of cases where a client will come to us and say, look, we're doing pen testing. We're working with our developers to remediate these things. It's just not working. We're not moving fast enough, right? So we'll do a workshop. We'll recommend a few things there, right? We don't want to heavily rely on pen testers to find what's wrong within an application stack, right? Is there stuff we can do up front, like threat modeling or SaaS, DAST, that we can immediately get that feedback before it even gets to that pen test stage? And then we know right after pen testing is going to go to production, right? So like Larry said, as more of we shift left there, we want to ensure we're giving value across the board, not only to the business and the development personnel. Lastly, the last point I want to take is implementations look different, right? Everyone's architecture patterns look different, right? Financial services and manufacturing is going to be heavily different from a DevSecOps model implementation, right? If I'm financial services, I might be a lot more concerned with PCI data, right? And then we're in manufacturing, I'm a lot more concerned maybe with operational technology and securing the manufacturing plant, right? So we need to be able to put those lenses on and take that approach and develop out DevSecOps frameworks specific to our clients, which is really what we seek hard to do. And again, I've made this point in the last slide. I'm going to bring it up one more time. Containers and serverless is becoming more and more prevalent. And that's great, right? Because from a container standpoint, the pros of them are they're fast, they're flexible, and they're quick to deploy. How do we develop a security program into that so we don't slow that velocity down, but we're still protecting the enterprise? So, you know, please put your questions in the chat. If you have any questions specifically when we talked about, we'd love to get to those at this point. I'll turn it over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Brandon. Like you mentioned, throw your questions in the chat. We're going to go through a Q&A and utilize our experts for anything that you may have additional questions about. And there was one in the chat about whether or not the presentation will be recorded. This will be recorded and posted on our LinkedIn after the call, so you can absolutely revisit the recording if you want to. All right. So thinking about this, you know, it could be an overwhelming change for an organization because it's a cultural shift when we think about DevSecOps. So thinking of that, can you give us some ideas on how to make adoption easier for your developers, or even how to prepare your internal team if an organization is thinking about next steps for DevSecOps? Larry, I'll pass this one to you to start us off.
No, sure. Thank you, Anna. So there's sticking my program manager's hat on, or leader's hat on, at first, there are several things you can do. The first thing is plan it out, communicate, run it as a typical program, agile program. Kind of, first of all, you sit down and define the goals, but then you meet with the individual departments or stakeholders, depending on the size of your company, and go through them, because sometimes things will work for some and sometimes things won't work for others. So by going through that, you will be able to, align with the other departments. And really it's about developing those communication and collaboration lines between departments. That's what's going to make everything easier, because as we've seen in the past many times, if you build something, but you don't build it so that people will use it, they won't, or they'll try to bypass it. And other things, like little things like sitting down and making sure whatever tool sets you use can be used by many, administered by a few, but used by many. To give an example, code scanners. Using GitHub Advanced Security as an example is easy, because once a developer checks in code, GitHub will run through it looking, for example, for secrets, and it'll tell them, hey, you've got a secret here. Nothing they really need to do on that. Or if you've got some more advanced scanners, letting them run it on their laptops, for example, or in their, I guess if you're using cloud systems, letting them run it on their test instances, letting them do it so they can get feedback right away, rather than having to check it in and waiting for the process to run. You can really make it easier on them at the start. But also the last piece I'm going to say is, I would say a security champions program for this is really key, because you want to involve the architects, you want to involve everybody in development, because you may find, security teams want to move from that gate to being that trusted advisor. And how they can do that is by enabling the other parts of the team to take ownership of pieces. For example, a secure SDLC. Security teams don't want to own that. They really would like the CTO or somebody else to own that and have input on it. They'll help advise on it, but that way it removes that angst between security and others. And again, you get more of a collaborative feel.
Thanks, Larry. All right, we have another question in the chat. Does the situation in Ukraine require any consideration for security in the US? Tim, I'm going to pass this one over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. So this is something I'm actually dealing with right now with a client, where not only is this, the global impact essentially impacting most everybody in the United States or around the world, from my clients are impacting their supply chain. Not necessarily directly from Ukraine, but the transference of information, data, and product throughout Eastern Europe because of the conflict there has impacted that, where they have to refactor and change supply lines, changing new vendors, impacting how these vendors interact with the company as a whole, authentication authorization, ensuring chain of custody of the product to verify that the product source, physical and digital, are both accurately accounted for and can be verified. Secondly, it is also from a manpower perspective. Number of people that were in various parts of Eastern Europe that may have been helping the client essentially just in their software development have been impacted, where we've needed to change vendors. So that whole new aspect of onboarding third-party talent, verifying their authentication, background, etc. So it's funny how global issues that may not be directly impacting you at home impact in numerous ways because we're so interconnected. Another thing what we are seeing is just the generic sense that people have of dealing with certain parts of the world. Won't name countries in this respect. And it's just a hesitancy that is creating, I would say, a false anxiety where people are not only concerned about the situation, but now a lot of the things that we talked about throughout this, the cultural aspect and the collaboration within the organization, people now are more united, or I say there's a more of a generic solidarity between business units to verify and be more secure because of the global conflict that we're seeing today.
Thanks, Tim. All right, we have another that just popped into the chat. Can you please share what titles, leaders, or stakeholders typically fund DevSecOps being implemented across most companies in your experience, given that they need to do DevSecOps and it's a cultural shift? Brandon, I'll give this one to you.
Yeah, so I definitely am excited to speak to this, and then I might hand it over to Tim if he's got some more to add. But I'm going to share from typically working in DevSecOps engagements the last 4 years, what I see and what typically works and what doesn't work. I'll start off with my pet peeve. I go into a lot of client engagements and a lot of client discussions, and the first thing I get from leadership is, we already do DevSecOps. We spent X million on DevSecOps tooling last year. Right. And then we actually get down to process and how they have people staffed. And it's not DevSecOps. It's the same siloed. No one's really talking to each other, but they're all kind of relying on a tool to do the work for them. And they're still having the same issues. Their application velocity is slow, and they're not having success with actually getting the team to collaborate together. Right. It's probably one of my biggest pet peeves, and the quickest thing I'm going to point out. I will say this: you have to get buy-in and trust from leadership teams. Typically in the financial services realm, where I work the most, we see CIOs and CISOs working together to really drive this, right? And then it has to be replicated at the director level and that mid-management level as well. I find mostly that lower, the people that are actually doing the work, the architects, the developers, the security personnel, they really want to do this. They really want to alleviate pain points and such like that. So their buy-in is quite quick, though you may have a few that have some change management issues there. But the culture really needs to be reciprocated from that mid-management level and that C-suite level as well. But it can't just be, hey, we're going to give funding for tooling. It needs to be, hey, we need to change how we work and shift the culture to where we're moving quicker here, right? A lot of the client engagements will walk up into, they've been doing DevSecOps or DevOps or something of the flavor for a few months, and they're struggling, right? And they're struggling. They're still having gates. They're still getting a bottleneck at some point, right? And typically, it is a culture shift that needs to happen, or a team staffing shift that needs to happen, or a mix of those where responsibility goes on to everyone, not just one team, to get something done. Right. So I'll say the successful leaders that I've seen really push security awareness across the board for the development team, the operations team, all the way down to, even the secretary that's sitting at the front desk. Right. So it really needs to be a full cultural shift there. And I'll see the stakeholders that fund it typically get involved with driving that culture shift. And they're really key to see the measurements of pre-DevSecOps and post-DevSecOps, so we continue that feedback to continually get better as we're moving forward. But Tim, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think the good point here, I think, is what's key is when you talk about titles, leaders, stakeholders, is understanding your comprehensive security plan enterprise-wide, right? So at the C-level suite, identifying that, we will need security. I know that's a very generic term, but what Brandon had mentioned is that you see a lot of number of line managers or individual contributors implementing security strategies and technology because they see the risk. And when a lot of times, and I guess this is deficient and no disrespect to clients, but they basically come to me and say, Tim, I need a tool. My team is telling me we have a bunch of security vulnerabilities. And that's when I try to get the solidarity or the unification of the, generically the CISO, the CTO, the senior vice president of infrastructure, senior vice president of product, the director level of infrastructure product as well. And then talk in a horizontal fashion to understand and say, where are we coming from? What is our future business objectives? And then building basically the cultural shift around that type of holistic vision, so to speak. Because once you have the top down approach and then bottom up, they can meet and not at the product level, but also at the enterprise level. So it's a without a doubt, it's not a technical problem. 9 times out of 10, it is a cultural and social problem where people try to buy things or work in silos and there's overlap or lack of continuity and not really a comprehensive strategy.
Thank you, Tim and Brandon. And thank you, Ken. Great question. All right, we have another one in the chat. What are the main security flaws you see in DevOps pipelines? Brandon, do you want to chime in for this one?
Yeah, I think me and Tim will tag team this one again, maybe. So great question, Bradley. This is something again that just kind of frustrates me when I get into these client engagements, right? The most prevalent thing I see, and you wouldn't think this, is that the DevOps pipeline itself becomes an impediment. And that should never be the case, right? You'll have like these development teams and they're like, man, I got to go through this DevOps pipeline. It's going to take like 2 weeks to get through the pipeline. And they're going to keep sending it back to me for different reasons. I got to make sure the code's packaged a certain way. Got to sit, right? Again, a culture from the top needs to say, hey, we need to utilize the DevOps pipeline, but it also needs to not be an impediment, right? Let's get the feedback to them quickly. Let's progress them through and let's work with them to raise awareness on what the pipeline's actually doing, right? You'll find a lot of people, and I know this isn't a security flaw, but I'll get to those in a second, but you'll find a lot of people, they'll buy in when they understand what value the pipeline's giving them, right? So a lot of the discussions I'll have is, look, I know the scan might take 4 to 8 hours to run, but it's going to provide you with all of the vulnerabilities that the pen test that eventually is going to happen is going to provide you. And you would have to take down the code anyway. Right. And then I'm also going to sit with your developers and we're going to look at all these scan results. And I'm going to say, look, man, you're coding a lot of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and a lot of SQL injection vulnerabilities. Right. Let's change that habit. Do you know about this? And provide them education and material to say, look, I'm in this with you. I want to make this as smooth as possible, but it's going to take us a few cycles to get there. From a security standpoint, something that I've seen where I see kind of a flaw, there's a coverage flaw, right? Maybe we don't scan everything we need to, or maybe the scanner we're using. I see a lot of heavy use of open source scanning, which is great at a beginning maturity level, right? So if we're using an open source scanner from a library, that's great. It's going to give us some kind of baseline. But there's got to be some sort of investment to get the right scanner to meet your need, right? And I've seen some cases where heavily regulated workloads are being and code is being scanned by an open source scanner, and I know they're not getting complete coverage, and that can still lead to vulnerable stuff going into production, right? And then the other thing is just circumventing the DevOps pipeline altogether. Is there a way in your organization, because I've seen this where people just choose not to use your pipeline. They just have another way to get to production, basically bypassing all of your security checks, right? But yeah, that's typically what I see. I'll pass it to Tim if he's got anything to add there.
Yeah, no, this is a pretty common question we get, and to Brandon's point, I think the challenge is most of the times when people are doing deep scans within either the build or the infrastructure, essentially it's taking a long period of time. There is ways that, and we can definitely help with this on how you can design your CI pipeline to effectively give you a partial deployment of at a feature test. So when everybody checks in the final build or the final artifact, let's say you have a team of 8, 10, 50, 100, that final build will go through its own set of cycle of testing. I think the key aspect, what Brandon was talking about, is rigor and fidelity. Having rigorous testing at the actual single developer level, adding more fidelity and rigor at that point diminishes the amount of testing that has to be done when everybody checks into the final branch. A really good point that Brandon brought up, I want to really highlight this, is that a lot of the open source tools, and no disrespect to the tooling, are not matched to the need or the product that are being developed. They'll do basically some good testing, but in most cases it's fairly superficial and does not really test the product in the fashion depending on the market, essentially. Another thing a lot of people miss within their security flaws is entitlement, access, keys, etc. are not verified essentially at the development pipeline. So looking at your local container environment, either local to your laptop or in the cloud, essentially, and how your application is accessing endpoints, essentially, of how those keys are verified, rotated, etc., should be just like in production. Generally, most of these topics that we're talking about can be validated or functionally automated. So, moving a lot of your investment, which is a tough pill to swallow, towards the automation. And when you develop your sprint or development of your product, or however you do your basically your project planning, is integrating the test automation with the development of that product. Obviously, that investment becomes expensive in the beginning, but the investment later on gives you a more viable product, more secure product, and you have more confidence in what you're deploying to your customer.
Thank you, Tim and Brandon. Great question, Bradley. We have another one. How does Taos DevSecOps now compare to tools like Sync, SUSE, WhiteSource, etc.? Larry, do you want to chime in for this one?
No, thanks, Hannah. So Taos DevSecOps now is not a tool set, actually. What it is, it's a service. So Taos, we have a managed service team as well as our consultants. It's part of our managed service team. Essentially, what it is think about it this way. It is a team that runs either with your DevOps or your DevSecOps current team, or by augmentation, or it actually can perform the functions of your DevOps and your DevSecOps team. So it's not necessarily a tool. It's a team that includes an architect, includes a series of folks who actually they embed into your team and help you, and they actually do the work for you for the DevSecOps pipeline. You still need to have a strategy, and you still need to have, you can build the pipeline out with them, but they are not necessarily tools like Sync or some of the others. Again, they would use those tools, they'd help you implement the tools and even run them, and they would help you react in certain instances to certain vulnerabilities, things like that, but they're kind of different.
Great, thanks, Larry. All right, we have another one. What are your thoughts on controlling shadow IT within DevOps, DevSecOps fields? Is this even a current issue? I'm not an expert in the field, but I have a strong interest. Brandon, I'll pass this on to you.
Thanks, Hannah. Ume Horn, that is a very pertinent question, and definitely is an issue. Shadow IT is one of the bigger issues I see from a DevSecOps point of view, right? Because we kind of get tunnel visioned with DevSecOps. People will say like, everything's going through the pipeline, everything's going through this one process, and maybe they're not aware. So the key thing to solve this, and the key thing that a lot of tooling you'll see and a lot of processes out there, is they're trying to give you visibility end to end. So that visibility is key with preventing shadow IT, for example. Sorry, somebody's keyboard's really. All right, there we go. So yes, that is very key. One of the issues I mainly see, and I'll bring up containers again, is I'll go into clients and say, okay, what's actually deployed from a container standpoint? And they'll go, yeah, I have a cluster over here on prem. Then we have a cluster in Amazon, and then we have a cluster on a VM sitting over here just for the developers to use. And I'm like, okay, well, what's deployed on them? And they'll say application code or data and stuff like that. Do we have a list of the containers and apps that are deployed? No, right? So we don't know what's actually out there and what's persisting out there. So using tools like a CSPM, for example, or some kind of container security tool to gain that visibility is very key. And then, that for bigger companies, this is a lot harder because there's just so much breadth. But yes, it is a very pertinent problem for a lot of reasons, right? Developers want to do stuff quickly, and maybe, they're not aware of the right way to release, deploy, and decommission for certain something down, right? So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Brandon. Tim, did you want to chime in at all for this one?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the collaboration conversation that we had, right? When people are building or developing infrastructure applications in silos, you are inherently developing a vulnerability by just not working together with your team. Now, in some cases, businesses' objectives are driving teams to deliver a product to market. So, when we talked earlier about, the leadership component, what are we doing? Working on the collaboration effort, developing an overarching strategy. And it doesn't have to be a draconian approach, right? It's giving or enabling your service teams to develop and have the freedom to, travel at the velocity, but having, an inherent secure posture or culture where people are trying to do the right thing and enabling them and providing the investment to the service teams for them to develop the product as suggested. It's a challenge that every company runs into, especially as we are, more remote. I've seen a lot of shadow IT people doing the right thing, but because they are not getting the traction or the velocity that they're needing from the organization, they move ahead. So it's not an uncommon scenario for sure.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Brandon. Great question. All right, we have another question from Daniel. For a brand that introduces DevSecOps primarily through a top-down approach, what recommendations do you have to engage engineers that don't consider security a high priority? Larry, can you help us with this one?
Sure. So I've actually run into this on several different assignments, including some very lengthy ones. And it's always a problem. What I like to say is, it comes from my past, you be a peacekeeper with a very big stick in your back pocket. You start off peacekeeping by, offering incentives, saying, hey, this is, collaborating, this is going to make your job easier. It's going to make your life easier. We can actually get code out. And typically I find about 70 to 80% of the folks will actually react well to that when you show them there's some positive to them. However, the problem is you still have that 20 to 30%, and I've run into that actually quite a bit on every assignment. And sometimes it is a matter of really showing them their budget. For example, saying, if we can get this in place, it's going to reduce your budget cost by 20 to 30%, and you can hire more engineers, for example. Typically, I find I work a lot with engineering departments and IT departments, and I find the engineering departments want to kick back, and it's all about budget. They want to save their budget. So if you can show that it's going to save their budget, they'll really go for that. If not, unfortunately, sometimes you do have to use the really big stick, which is the executives. Unfortunately, if it's a top-down approach, that means you've already got the buy-in of the execs, and sometimes you just have to try and massage the different management levels on the way down to get them to own their teams and do that. But if that doesn't work, then sometimes you just have to escalate. And I say appropriately escalate, not escalate to get somebody fired or such, but escalate to say, we've got a problem and we're spending millions here or whatever, and we can't finish this project on time because XYZ. Kind of use some of the standard PMI Institute, Project Management Institute methodologies of, collaborate, if not escalate.
Great. Nice question. Thanks, Daniel. All right, we have a question from Bradley. How to encourage sustainable collaboration between teams? We have many DevOps teams and development teams that are siloed. Tim, can you help us with this one?
Yeah, sure. This is a pretty common problem within large organizations where, the lack of collaboration or solidarity diminishes the returns on the development lifecycle. How to motivate this is twofold. Is when we were talking earlier in the slide deck and we were talking about the feedback loop, how to visualize the operation. Essentially, we talked a little bit about integration testing. When you can document and provide, and again, this is not a blame game, but when you can identify bugs or security vulnerabilities for the lack of testing or the lack of integration or lack of collaboration, that inherently shows where the fault lies. And, at a better way of explaining it is that a portfolio operates as an army. Everybody works in their own silo to deploy their particular product, but at the end of the day, stock price changes as the portfolio is more effective or more successful. When you can visualize the lack of efficiency, the lack of collaboration within an organization, that brings it to bear. Again, allowing for or enabling or in some respects advising the C-suite to invest in your service organizations to allow for them to augment staff, to spend more time on automation, to integrate effectively by, in integration scenarios where you stub out each individual dependency within the portfolio, to provide you with a, I don't want to call it a streamlined, but a more efficient process of how you integrate the services, kind of brings that collaboration together, right? When you develop a, for example, when Larry and I and Brandon are all working in 3 disparate teams, when I deploy my build in my environment and I have a dependency stubbed out, mocked up version, response, API, what have you, between him and I, same with Larry, without that verification, and I want to reach out to him and say, hey, look, your service isn't working, or I'm getting this feedback at this point, and he could say, oh, well, we changed this feature that might impacted you. That synergy and that collaboration is kind of key. And when you can illustrate that to clients, essentially, you can develop that kind of all hands on deck approach to, instead of developing the product in a single isolation or single silo, essentially building it as a programmatical portfolio product. Brandon, let me hand it off to you. I think you've got some good points here.
No, you answered it perfectly. Let's go ahead and get to the next one. That was great.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. All right, we have a question from Mike. Is DevSecOps service and methodology common among the hyperscalers? Any difference or nuance by cloud providers such as GCP, Azure, or AWS? Tim, back to you.
Yeah, no, so I think to be completely candid on this question, I think the cloud enables this fundamentally exponentially greatly because of its fluidity, right? Is the fact that you are able to deploy infrastructure and application at a drop of a hat enables a lot of the automation strategies that we've put forth here. So, for example, when you are doing any type of rigorous testing at the feature level, as I am the single developer, the cloud enables you to deploy an entire stack for yourself, fundamentally to do a full stack review. All of your testing can be integrated, either infrastructure, application, combinations of both, at your as well as your build, identifying your vulnerabilities, and then report back out prior to your code commit. So when you check in your code, being any type of automated SCM framework called GitOps, Argo CD, again, I'm using AWS in this example, enables you to be able to do more rigorous testing in the cloud than you may see in the physical world. Again, to pull back to extend upon that, if you are implementing Kubernetes or any type of abstraction, containerized private cloud scenario, same scenario, but I would suggest that a lot of the hyperscalers not only give you the platform to do this, but they also have a very rich tool set to enable at the code level, endpoint security, automation that are self-service products or service products that they provide for you. So I would say they definitely without enable you or allow you to accelerate this strategy that we're articulating today.
Yeah, I'll just add something real quick to that.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
I spend a lot of time in these hyperscalers because we're on the cloud security services team. So, most of our time is spent in Azure, AWS, and a little bit of GCP. Just don't get caught in the trap of thinking just because you're using the cloud, it's secure by default, right? So one of the things we first seek to do is secure the landing zone, right? So whatever we're deploying out, we want to ensure what we are deploying on, whether it be AWS, GCP, or Azure, we have the security controls already implemented in that fashion. And when a new service comes out, you really have to be a little more worried about that, because we see about a 6 months gap between, hey, the new service has been published, and then 6 months, Amazon will come out with, here's how to secure the service, or maybe another service to secure that service, right? So you have to watch that. What I'm really interested to see, and maybe you'll agree with this, Mike, is I think they're going to push this towards this DevSecOps stuff into their zero trust models as they move forward. So I'm interested to see how that kind of brings kind of a cohesive approach to their security frameworks, right? So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thanks. All right. We have another question. I'm going to pass this one to Larry. Where can a beginner in DevOps learn about DevSecOps?
Thanks. So there's several different ways of doing this. Different people learn different ways. So for example, my own son, I bought him a subscription to a service because he is very technical. He can sit down and learn watching videos, but he misses some nuances when he does that. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, you can go to YouTube and watch a bunch of videos and that, but you need to get involved in user groups. And that's another really good way, because you'll actually get the experience But another benefit that a user group will give you is sometimes you will hear the future. You'll hear more than just what's happening now and how do I do it. You'll hear the future. And another way of doing it is getting a mentor. And sometimes that can be through a service. Sometimes that can be through a user group as well, or friends, or sometimes cross-company contacts. That's another way. A mentor is a really good way to do this because they can partner with you, especially if they've got experience themselves. Or they can put you in touch with somebody else who may be able to help guide you in creating a plan. I always say to people, you should be looking out at your career about the next 5 years. It's difficult to know past that. I mean, I've been doing security for about 30 years, and I'm just amazed at where I am. And I will be honest with you, I didn't plan to be up here. We did 5-year incrementals, and things just happen sometimes. So that's one of the best things you can do is find a mentor, get involved with a user group. But it's going to be the effort you put into for the participation as well, though. Don't just expect them to feed you. You really need to be involved with it, and you really need to embrace it.
Great.
Larry?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
I was going to add to that. I think the 3 that I have recommended to my newer, younger colleagues, Udemy, SANS.org, Cloud Academy, those are all really good foundational places to start, at least give you the fundamental technology as well as kind of the strategy component. And those are really, really good starts. Basic Python implementation, talks about the cloud, all of those things, the strategies we talked here, to give you like fundamental basics. And those are all just Google, DevSecOps training. You'll find that stuff there. Some are free, some are paid, but definitely all good. All 3 of those are really good places to start.
Yeah, and I guess I have to add my 2 cents as well. I like Larry, did not plan to be in this position. I started out as a developer, and after seeing how development worked, I saw the need arise for this. And then I Googled it and found DevSecOps, right? And a lot of what I learned came from interacting with other developers, right? How do I make your life easier? And then it came with interacting with cloud operations teams. How do I make your life easier, but still secure it, right? So don't discount real life experience. If you have some bandwidth, maybe at your current role, seek to, be a security personnel in some kind of fashion, whether it's with the ops team or development team. You're going to learn a lot about pain points from that standpoint, right? So.
Great.
Well, just one last quick point on one last one. It's called Cybrary. If you're really into security, Cybrary has DevSecOps as well.
Thanks, Larry. And Larry, I have another question for you. Thinking of this kind of from the customer success perspective, it's one thing to adopt a new process. It's another thing to be able to see if it's positively impacting your business. So can you talk a little bit about some of the KPIs or ways that you would recommend measuring ROI if someone were to implement DevSecOps?
Sure. I'm going to speak to this more at the high level because typically what happens is everybody look at KPIs and they start at the technical level. How fast are we pushing code through the pipeline? How fast are we doing this? How many bugs? How many defects? And those are important. But if you're really looking to push DevSecOps at your company or show it's being effective, you need to up-level that. And usually what you want to do is you want to start showing something like a security posture number. Most times you're going to have to create that because there isn't an industry standard. But if you align it with the business objectives, for example, if you're showing it to your CEO, if you're showing it to your CFO, in many companies, they're not technical. They use technology, but they really don't understand, what's this thing called a CI/CD pipeline? It pushes my product out. That's about as far as they want to go, and that's about as far as they know. And so by converting these numbers into something that is business oriented, whether it's, hey, look, we had a 20% reduction last quarter in cost because we're no longer putting out as many bugs. That Log4j incident that came out, instead of costing us millions and taking us weeks, well, now it took us days to get a fix out. Or the fact that you're now getting product out faster. We're saving 20% on our engineers, or being able to reallocate. Never say you want to get rid of the engineers. You reallocate them. They're now able to do other more fun tasks. Again, those are things that the business will understand. Again, and in security posture, it's a larger project and it's a larger discussion, but basically you take all of your security information, which includes DevSecOps, and you roll it up in and say a single number. Maybe it's out of 100. and you say, well, our goal is to be at an 80 out of 100 because nobody will ever get to 100 out of 100. But if you say, here's where we're at, that's our goal, and we're at 74 this month, you can then measure the effects up and down of your changes of your program implementing DevSecOps. It's like, look, now everything is static controls. Now we're actually testing. Nothing is that we're unaware of is getting to production except for, these 0 days. That would be, cross-site scripting is being caught very, very early on. So all of that will roll up into this number, which the executives will get. So choosing your KPIs based on the business is what I would suggest. And if you think of program management, I know it's boring, but it is one of those KPIs. It'll give you a series of KPIs that the business will get. Financial ones also are really good. Yes, you can throw some technical ones in. I actually have worked at a couple security companies that made firewalls. And yes, our CEO did know firewalls. So yes, we included some, but other healthcare companies, they won't care about the firewall ones. They'll want to know, are we going to be high trust compatible, and something like we're meeting 80% of our controls. That's what they want to know.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. Well, it looks like we're just about at time now. It looks like we've also concluded the questions that have come through the chat. If anyone wants to throw a last minute one in there, feel free. But otherwise, just want to thank everyone, both our panelists, Brandon, Larry, Tim, for all of this helpful insight, and then anyone who joined the webinar or contributed with a question. As a quick reminder, this will be recorded and also posted on our LinkedIn page, so feel free to look through that. I'm going to pass it over to Larry to give a little bit of information on supplemental information you'll get after the call as well. So thank you.
Nope, thanks, Hannah. So all attendees will receive a copy of an ebook that Taos is releasing. You should be getting that shortly. It is an ebook on security, on the journey to security. So I hope you find it useful, and please feel free to ask any questions about it. In addition, we have several different assessments. You can talk to our salespeople. You can reach out to Taos. For example, we do have a cloud security assessment that we perform where we will come in, work with you to assess your cloud regardless of what it is. It can be any of them or a hybrid cloud. We also have cost optimization assessments where we'll work with you on your cloud provider to make sure that you're not overspending or sometimes underspending depending on what your performance needs and your costs are. So we do have several different types of assessments. So please feel free to reach out to any of the Taos marketing folks or our sales folks. You can either use LinkedIn, or you can go to our website. There's actually a contact us button. And you can reach out to us with any specific questions on the webinar. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.